Yascha Bhute Paramgata Tavubo Shukamedhete Krishyati Antarati, Krishyati Antarito Jana. Prabhus? Yascha Mudatamo Loke Yascha Bhute Paramgata Tavubo Shukamedhete Krisyantyantārito janaha. Ya, one who is. Cha, also. Mudha tama, the lowest of the fools. Loke, in the world. Ya cha, and one who is. Buddhe, of intelligence. Param, transcendental. Gata, gone. To, of them. Ubo, both. Shukam, happiness. Edhete, enjoy. Krishyati, suffer. Antaratya, situated between. Janaha, persons. I'll need the Bhagavatam. Translation, both the lowest of fools and he who is transcendental to all intelligence enjoy happiness, whereas persons between them suffer the material pangs. Please repeat after me. And he who is transcendental to all intelligence enjoys happiness, whereas persons between them suffer the material pangs. I think I know which category I'm in. So, reading from the purport. The lowest of fools do not understand material miseries. They pass their lives merrily and do not inquire into the miseries of life. Such persons are almost on the level of the animals, who, although in the eyes of superiors are always miserable in life, are unaware of material distresses. A hog's life is degraded in its standard of happiness, which entails living in a filthy place, engaging in sex enjoyment at every opportune moment, and labouring hard in a struggle for existence. But this is unknown to the hog. Similarly, human beings who are unaware of the miseries of material existence and are happy in sex life and hard labour are the lowest of fools. Yet, because they have no sense of miseries, they supposedly enjoy so-called happiness. The other class of men, those who are liberated and are situated in the transcendental position above intelligence, are really happy and are called paramahansas. But persons who are neither like hogs and dogs, nor on the level of the paramahansas, feel the material pangs, and for them inquiry about the supreme truth is necessary. The Vedanta Sutra states, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Now, one should inquire about Brahman. This inquiry is necessary for those who are between the Paramahansas and the fools who have forgotten the question of self-realization in the midst of life in sense gratification. It's a very, very wonderful purport here that Prabhupada's talking about some of the most elemental core parts of our philosophy, which is how are we suffering and how to get out of the suffering. It's one of the most important things that we study. So this chapter 7 is continuing the dialogue or the talk between the great Rishi Maitreya and the great devotee Vidura. And it's been going on for several previous chapters. So now we're the beginning of third canto. Krishna's spoken the Uddhava Gita to Uddhava. Maitreya was hearing, so it's just the three of them. And then Krishna told Uddhava, you must go now. And he gave Uddhava the instruction to go north to Badrinath. And he was to meet up with the devotees, the incarnations, Nara Narayan Rishi, and impart to them what Krishna had spoken. And then he said to Vidura, now you go find Maitreya Rishi and impart that knowledge. Maitreya had to impart that knowledge to Vidura. So Vidura finds Maitreya and he asks Maitreya about the creation. And we've read in preceding chapters all about the different ways that the Lord is creating. There's the Mahatattva, all the different ways that the living entity starts to manifest in this material world. And then Maitreya explains this core theological question, how the living entity becomes bewildered. How is it that the jiva falls down? How does he become bewildered? And how does he become covered with that misconception? And as a consequence, he suffers. And this whole purport is about suffering. So Vidura has finished up his line of inquiry in the previous verses. So in this verse, Vidura is speaking, and he's stating the three very interesting topics that feature in this verse. The first one is that the fools are happy. The second one is that the elevated transcendentalists, or the Paramahansas, they're happy. And then everyone in between these two, either the fools or the transcendentalists, they are suffering the material pangs. So the foolish person is completely oblivious to the ephemeral nature of the material world. He's thinking that he's going to continue in his life, thinking that whatever he's enjoying now is a permanent fixture in his life. I'm never going to suffer. Or if he's in a suffering condition, he's thinking, no, just around the corner, there's going to be happiness. So I'm not enjoying now, but if I have X amount of dollars in my bank account, then I will be able to enjoy. I'll be free from anxiety. And of course, you know, it's the anxiety that everyone is suffering in this material world is increasing, it's not decreasing. It's becoming more and more apparent. So, you know, rental crisis, high rents, high cost of buying houses, not enough houses to buy. It continues. There's very stringent parts of our suffering. And of course, with COVID times, we suffered a great deal for a couple of years. So it's pretty obvious that this material world is not a nice place. So, and you know, we may think, okay, I'll find that great job and I'll get those dollars, or I'll find that perfect husband, or I'll find that perfect wife, then I'll be happy. And of course, you know, those who are married know that that's not actually how it works. That along with working out your own problems, you're now helping someone else to work out their problems. So it becomes like double trouble, not just alleviation of trouble. So that main focus is often on accruing material wealth. Prabhupada used to have this funny saying that money is the honey. So people are struggling in this material existence, trying to find happiness. And without understanding that real happiness is when we're actually asking the questions about why we're here. What are we doing in this human form of life? And the big difference between the animal life and the human form of life, you know, animals are eating, humans are eating, animals are mating, humans are mating, animals are, you know, creating families and houses, humans are creating families and houses. So the big difference is that the human being can actually inquire, atato brahmajigyasa, can inquire about the absolute truth. Who are we actually? What are we doing here in this material world? And what is the absolute truth? So Srimad Bhagavatam guides us along that path of inquiry. And of course, in the way devotees live, the way we live this sattvic lifestyle, getting up early, bathing, meditating, attending prayers and kirtans in the temple, studying the sastra, all of these things help us elevate to a mode of goodness, and it helps us to understand all of these really critical parts of our lives. So the other party that Prabhupada mentions here, and the verse mentions, is the wise, transcendentalists. So the wise transcendentalist, he knows that all suffering is temporary and all enjoyment is temporary. And I remember when I was a very young devotee, I thought that nothing bad would ever happen to me. We were all young in the movement. I think apart from Srila Prabhupada, none of us were over 25. Most of us were between 18 and 22. So we were all fit and healthy and had strong bodies and didn't get sick very much. But then, of course, we understand as we get older in life, we get more maturity, more wisdom, we can understand that, yes, these things are going to happen, these vicissitudes of life are going to happen. And what spiritual life does, spiritual life or spiritual practices do, they give you the tools by which you can cope and understand why all these sufferings come to us. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So the transcendentalist, he focuses on the permanent aspect of life. That is, what's that permanent aspect? How to get out of that transient happiness and suffering, and how to be free from samsara, or repeated birth and death. In Gita, there's a nice verse, 2:14, Mata spasastu kunteya shitushna shtokadukadaha agama payino nichas tam statikshashva bharata. And it talks, in that verse, is talking about this non-permanent happiness and distress. A son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of the winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception of Sayana Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So that's one of the signs of the great souls, that despite any apparent suffering, they are not affected. They understand they're not this body. They have full realization of the fact they're not this body, that we're spirit soul. And Prabhupada is the shining example of that. Even though he was, he's our founding spiritual master, so he started everything from scratch when he went to America in 1969. And he it wasn't an easy path for him to take. He didn't have sponsors, he didn't have big donors. He literally had 20 rupees in his pocket and a trunk of these Srimad Bhagavatam books, the first few cantos. And he did not let that, all of those issues and problems in materially speaking, he never let that stop him in his determination. And even when Srila Prabhupada was ill, he would still be preaching. And if you ever read the biography of Srila Prabhupada, it's called Your Ever Well Wisher, very wonderful book. And at the end of Srila Prabhupada's life, he was in a materially very suffering state. He hadn't eaten for many months. There was no fat on his body, so all the nerves were right at the skin level. So even a sheet on Srila Prabhupada was very painful. And what was he doing? He was translating the Srimad Bhagavatam right up to the very last days. So Prabhupada is that perfect example of the perfect Paramahansa, the perfect transcendentalist. So these waves of happiness and distress, sometimes it's even within an hour or even in a day. You wake up, you're feeling really grumpy, and you have your shower and you get ready and you feel good, and then someone says something to you or looks at you the wrong way, or your boss at work gets on your case, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into misery. Your boyfriend doesn't call, your husband doesn't pay you a compliment. All of these things, you're thrown around, you're like in a tumble dryer, and you're going around here and around there, and it's unceasing. But it is temporary. And this verse that I just quoted shows us that happiness and distress are just like winter and summer seasons. They come and they go. But our job, our role in this human form of life is to try and be transcendental to those vagaries. Try and understand when we're feeling unhappy or miserable or ill or sick. It's all temporary. But the happiness that is permanent, that is the happiness one achieves in spiritual knowledge. So that happiness is permanent. So, and Prabhupada was often quite blunt when he was speaking about the fools and the rascals, but he didn't advise us to do the same. So Prabhupada, with his great advancement in age, he was very senior, and he was also the loving transcendentalist. So he didn't actually have any malice or anything like that. He was just calling a spade a spade. And this morning, actually, when I was getting ready to come to the temple, I was listening to a lecture by Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada was saying, fools and rascals. And I laughed because I was thinking about this verse, which is about fools and rascals. And Prabhupada said, the third class fool is the karmi, that is the fruitive worker. The second class fool is the jnani, or those who seek merely knowledge. And the first class fool, so the third class is the fruitive workers. The second class fool is the jnanis, or those seeking knowledge. And the first class fool is the yogi. But we're all fools. So I thought that was quite interesting. And when there was a senior disciple of Prabhupada's, Bhakti Sri Damodar Maharaj, and he was actually was a scientist. And he asked Prabhupada how he should deal with the scientists when he's representing the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which was an organisation within our organisation that was focused on scientific research and scientists. And Prabhupada said, I may call them fools and rascals, but you cannot. You should deal with them as gentlemen. So we should always be very polite and respectful in our dealings as gentlemen and gentle ladies. And we won't, stand up there and say, you're all fools and rascals. That's Srila Prabhupada's prerogative. So, Prabhupada, he didn't have, his purity was complete, absolutely pure. He had no didn't harbour any kind of material qualities, and he was actually very compassionate. So sometimes when Prabhupada would call a spade, he was actually showing his compassion, giving us a little bit of a wake-up call. And in many cases, some of them actually quite liked Prabhupada chastising them like that. So in regards to the wise and foolish, I came across this old story that Prabhupada often quoted. And he told this story on a morning walk in Bombay in 1976. And there's a big tall tree. And there's a man perched on a large branch of that tree. And he's facing the trunk. And he starts sawing the branch off the tree. And you can imagine what's going to happen. He's sawing the branch and he's sitting on the branch, so he's going to fall. So someone walks past and they say to him, hang on a second, you're going to fall down. And he goes, he keeps on sawing, and of course he falls down. And then he just had some bumps and bruises. He wasn't critically injured. And he turned to the man who told him, stop what you're doing. And he said, oh, you must be a great astrologer. You could predict the future. And actually, when Prabhupada told that story, he said that, so who goes to the astrologer? Only fools and rascals. No sane man goes. Prabhupada wasn't big on astrologers. And one time he actually said, let's have some fun, let's go consult an astrologer. And of course, very famous astrologers had done Srila Prabhupada's chart, and his astrological chart was off the chart. It was really, really the most incredible overview of Srila Prabhupada's personality. And of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was the picture there on the far left, he was Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who's in our disciplic succession there on the right of here, they were astrologers as well. But the only problem is with this age of Kali, it's not that the science of astrology is poor, but it's those who practice the science of astrology. So there's some defect there in Kali Yuga. But we still get some good astrologers, that's for sure. But Prabhupada wasn't right into consulting astrologers. And there was a Sanskrit poet called Bhartrhari, and he composed 300 verses, and some of them were about fools. And seeing that we're talking about fools and rascals, I thought that you might find these quite interesting. So he says, a man may forcibly get back a jewel from the teeth of a crocodile. He may cross over the raging waves of sea. He may wear an angry serpent on his head as if it were a garland of flowers, but he cannot win over the mind of one who is foolish and obstinate. So even though the son may want to go off, or the daughter may want to go off and do something that's really putting them in a dangerous situation, and the father's saying, no, please don't do that, this is not advisable, you're going to run into all of these different problems. But the son is obstinate, he knows better, he knows more than his father or his mother, and goes, no, I'm going. So what can you do with someone so foolish and obstinate? And then another verse he wrote was, a man may get oil from sand by violent pressure. He may drink water from mirage when oppressed by thirst. He may get the possession of a horn from the rabbit. All of these things quite impossible, but he cannot win over the mind of one who is foolish and obstinate. So these are the difficulties that, we face as struggling souls. We're kind of foolish and we're kind of obstinate, Oftentimes we think we know better than, our seniors, Srila Prabhupada, the Bhagavatams, we've all got our own little opinion. And then there's also a modern adage that goes, a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. So you can't force someone to take spiritual knowledge. You can only present it and say, my dear sir, my dear lady, please read these books. Please try to absorb some of the information and knowledge in these books. So even if we're not suffering at this moment, even if we're feeling quite happy and quite content, that happiness is likened to being drowned. So you're being drowned, you can't breathe, you're underwater, and then you get pulled out and you take in that big breath of air. That is like happiness in the material world. It's temporary, and it's really, Prabhupada explains that it's really only the cessation of suffering. It's actually not real happiness. And when we make advancement in our spiritual life, that happiness that we will achieve is beyond any happiness in the material world. Prabhupada explains that everything in that material world, all of that sense gratification, it pales into insignificance compared to what we experience in spiritual life. And we're only into chapter 7 now, but in chapter 27, there's a really nice story about Lord Indra. Now, Lord Indra is king of the heavens, and he occupies a very, very grand position. He's been given this service by Krishna. He's in charge of all the rains and all of, the heavenly kingdoms. But he did something that wasn't very good, and he got cursed by his spiritual master, Brihaspati. And he got cursed to take birth as a hog here on this material world. So his hog life to him was pretty happy. He had his hog family, had his hog babies, his little piglets, little hoglets, and he was, enjoying himself. And then the time for his curse was up. So Lord Brahma came down and said to Indra in his piggy body, said, now you can come back to the heavenly kingdom. Now in the heavens, life is very, very, very long. They have very, very long life. They don't get ill. They're always, in a very happy position. But Indra had forgotten all about that. So he went, no. How can I leave my family? I've just had more piglets. They need my guidance. I can't go back. So he didn't want to leave. So he had to be forced to leave. So this is the spell of Maya, that even if Lord Indra forgets his heavenly standard of life, what to speak of us? We forget what is our true position, which is that of being completely happy in a perfect body that doesn't get sick, a spiritual body, and being reunited in our relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world. So Krishna is personally canvassing everyone. Give up everything in this material world. Come to me. I will protect you. And in Bhagavad Gita in 1866, he says that, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. And we think, oh, it's okay. I'm quite all right. I'm nicely situated here. Why should I surrender? And that's what's called Maya, or illusion. We become covered over. And Maya has two aspects that affect the conditioned soul. That's the throwing potency, that we're thrown into this material world. And there's the covering potency, where, like Indra in his pig body, he was covered over. He didn't realize. So that throwing Shakti is Prakshepatmika Shakti. And the covering Shakti is Avaranatmika Shakti. So these are Maya's two potencies. And we have to understand that Maya Devi, she's also being engaged in Krishna's service. And she's got a really, really heavy job. Her heavy service is to actually keep the insincere souls in the material world. So the very fact that you're all here means that you are sincere souls. So Krishna is so kind, Prabhupada is so kind. He set up these temples that we can come together and we can think, what is the meaning of life? So, and there's another, I'm really into the stories today, aren't I? So there's another funny story from the tales of the Pancharatra, the Panchatantra. And the Sanskrit, it means 5 treatises or 5 chapters. And it's a collection of Indian animal fables that if you can, when you go to India, you'll pick up any of these little comic books, and the kids love them. And they're all of these different fables that are teaching us lessons. So this is a story that illustrates that knowledge without intelligence can lead you into hot water, like that second class fool, those who are seeking knowledge. So there were 4 friends, and they lived in a town, and all four of them were young Brahmins, and they were very knowledgeable. They'd been studying under their spiritual master, under their teacher, and they had it together. They knew all kinds of really amazing mystic things that they could do. But they were young and they were poor, so they were all thinking, you know what, we have to get the attention of the king, so he will support us nicely. And 3 of them were very learned, and the 4th one had a little bit of knowledge, but he had a lot of common sense. He wasn't like the guy on the tree soaring off the branch. So they decided, okay, let's travel, we're going to earn some money, we're going to make our name and fame. So they're walking along, and they thought, oh, hang on a second, this 4th one, he might be a bit of a burden to us. He's not so knowledgeable in the mystic arts. And the others thought, no, maybe we should leave him behind. And then they thought, no, he's our friend, let's bring him along anyway. But they still didn't listen to him. So they're going along, and they come across a dead lion in the jungle. And one of the Brahmins turned to his friend and goes, okay, let's start using our scholarship. We're going to bring this lion back to life. And the fourth Brahmin didn't think it was a good idea. Keep in mind, he was the one that had some common sense. He said, no, don't test your skills out on this lion. So that, no, forget that. You don't know anything. You don't even know how to do it. So one of the Brahmins collected all the bones from the lion because it had been scattered around. He put all the bones in place. And by his use of mantras, he put all of the skeleton back together. And then the other Brahmin started to use his scholarship to cover the skeleton with the flesh and the fur. And the fourth Brahmin is saying, still his lion's there standing, but he's not brought back to life. And they're about to bring him back to life. And the fourth Brahmin goes, no, don't. And they went, oh, forget it, we're not listening to you. So he goes, okay, wait 1 second. So the fourth Brahmin, the one with the common sense, he went and found a very, very tall tree. And he climbed as far as he could to the top of the tree, and the other Brahmins didn't listen to him. So guess what happened? They brought the lion to life, and then the lion ate them. So it's a matter of, using one's intelligence. And, we've all been fools and we've all been rascals. But somehow or other, by Prabhupada's mercy, we've been given this opportunity to leave our foolishness and rascaldom behind. And sometimes it's a daily struggle. You might wake up and you feel like a fool and a rascal. Of course, we always like to be humble. We shouldn't be thinking, proudly of ourselves. But it's always the idea that you hate the sinner, you hate the sin, not the sinner. So even if we may go through our individual travails in our lives, in our spiritual life, and we might have a bad day one day, just start the next day anew. Just get your enthusiasm back up. Don't let it weigh you down. So sometimes we may feel a bit foolish and like rascals, but then we listen to the sastra, we listen to the spiritual master, and we're on the path again. And, it's not like once you're on the path of devotional service, it's not that you won't suffer. Yes, just like I said before, the path of spiritual life gives us the tools where we can deal with our suffering in an intelligent way, that we understand, I actually deserve much worse in my karma, but Krishna is actually minimizing it. So in Bhagavatam it says that this is a definition of karma, that we look on suffering as a curative treatment administered by the personal hand of the Lord. So it's not ordinary material karma. It's actually little lessons that Krishna is giving us. Sometimes they're little taps, other times they're a bit of a kick. And Jutakama, who's a senior Prabhupada disciple, he gave a very nice class in Mayapur in the year 2020, sorry. And he said that when devotees appear to be suffering, they set a good example even in their suffering, because they understand their adversities are reduced by Krishna's grace. So we're not getting that full whammy. And he gave this nice example of one brahmachari. He went to the welfare office in the US, and, very blissful brahmachari, and he had to fill out the forms. And one of the questions was, list your assets, and he put 0. So when he went to hand in the form to the lady at the desk, she was looking at the form, and then she's looking at this blissful brahmachari who's smiling ear to ear. And she said, well, this can't be true. You must be lying. 0 assets. Everyone would be miserable if they had 0 assets, but you're smiling. He didn't see it as, any kind of impediment. And in 5th canto, in chapter 8, Maharaj Bharat talks about the karma for a devotee. He says that suffering may appear to be due to past karma, but it's offered to rectify the devotee and bring him to pure devotional service. So when we're suffering, we shouldn't feel that, oh, this is, just pointless suffering. The suffering is there to give us a wake-up call and to also understand that Krishna is very kind. And Prabhupada, in that purport, he says, I'll quote Prabhupada here, "It is with this conviction that we declare in our Back to Godhead magazine that devotees like the Goswamis living in Vrindavan who purposely commit some sinful activity are born in the bodies of dogs, monkeys and tortoises in that holy land." And if you ever go to Vrindavan, full of monkeys, full of hogs and lots of tortoises in the Jamuna River. And Prabhupada says they take on these lower life forms for a short while. And after they give up those animal bodies, they are again promoted to the spiritual world. So that's in Vrindavan Dham, very special. So it may appear to be due to past karma, but it's offered to rectify the devotees and minimize. And in 4th canto, chapter 26, Prabhupada writes that the devotee accepts a reversal of his position in life as a benediction by the Lord and consequently offers the Lord more obeisances and prayers, thinking that the punishment is due to his past misdeeds and that the Lord is punishing him very mildly. He's just giving a little bit of what we really deserve. And, that's something that we'd like to think of, that, this process of surrender, it may be a rocky path sometimes, but will even out in the end as we become more and more advanced in our spiritual life. And so, we sincerely hope that we can go back to the spiritual world. And Prabhupada has promised us that. Krishna has promised us that. So I'll draw to a close now. So we know all about the fools and rascals now, and the transcendentalists. The wise man, he's happy, and the foolish is also happy. He's only happy because he doesn't realize that actually he is suffering, or he will suffer. And, as life progresses, most of you are very young, and I can assure you as life progresses, it will throw you some curveballs. But if you have that steadfast understanding that Krishna is my friend, God is my friend, and that my duty in this human form of life is to make some progressive advancement, not just to be caught up in how much money I have or how many, assets I have. Even if you have 0 assets, it doesn't matter. When you're serving Krishna, then there's heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps of numbers after that. Before that, 0, and after that, 0. So does anyone have any comments or questions? Do we have a...
Hare Krishna Mataji. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your class.
Thank you.
It was very nice, and I found it very helpful for myself. So I just wanted to express my gratitude.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very nice of you. Thank you. It's always good to hear that, you haven't been sitting here talking and everyone's going, because it is a fascinating topic. Vaishnavi has a question for me.
Yeah, thank you for the class. I was just listening to, in relation to what you were talking about, my Guru Maharaj Krishna Goswami, yesterday on Facebook, he was talking about suffering, and one devotee asked that, is it like for sense gratification if you pray to Krishna to take away your suffering? And he says not necessarily, because he gave his own example when he had the kidney stones. He was in so much pain and he was praying to Krishna, because we can pray to Krishna if it hinders our service. We can say, Krishna, please help me, this is affecting my service. So my question is, where is that fine line where you kind of do everything you can possible, but then still you're in that suffering position? So how far do we go, and is it different for different people? And we just accept it, as you said, tatenu kampam, like accept whatever comes.
Very good question, Vaishnavi. It's not one rule. It's not one size fits all. So it varies in the individual case. So for someone having a sore toe, they might see as a hindrance to their devotional service because they can't dance in the kirtan. So that's kind of a bit, we go, okay, it's just a sore toe. I really should have had my leg cut off, but I've just got a sore toe. So we don't necessarily pray to Krishna, oh, please take away my sore toe. But when it's actually impeding your chanting, your service, like your Guru Maharaj was saying about his kidney stones. Now, kidney stones are so painful, they've been likened to the pain of childbirth. They're that painful. So that's very extreme suffering. So, we understand that Krishna is our loving Father, He's our friend. If we can't turn to Krishna, then whom can we turn to? So it's up to Krishna whether He wants to listen to your prayers. It may be something that we have to suffer because it will be for our long-term benefit. And if you're not sure, okay, we're all individuals and the suffering of one individual is different to the suffering of another. Like Prabhupada says, the scripture says, one can never know the joys or the suffering of another living entity because it's all very customized, it's all individual. So if you're not sure, then ask a senior devotee, ask your Guru Maharaj, ask another senior devotee whom you trust their opinion, and say, okay, look, I've got this situation happening with me. I really feel I need some help from Krishna to get over this. Is it sense gratification if I pray for that? Of course, on the ultimate level, the pure devotee, he never asks Krishna for anything because he doesn't want to inconvenience Krishna. But we've got to adjust in these material bodies. And sometimes, yes, we pray to the Lord, please, help me understand, help ease my suffering. Sometimes that easement of suffering is giving you realizations. It's not actually just taking away the suffering. So when my son was 11, my eldest son was 11, he lost the sight in one of his eyes. And he was in Mayapur Gurukul, and we flew him back as an emergency. And I remember when he was going through the surgery, they had to do a biopsy to find out what had happened. And I remember praying with such fervent prayer, please, my dear Lord, if I've done anything to please you, please don't let my son be blind. Please save his sight in that eye. And I prayed with such depth of sincerity, but it was his destiny, and he lost the sight in that eye. And it was, a very, very heavy thing for a mother to have to deal with. But, it was his suffering, my suffering, and it wasn't Krishna's will to change that outcome. But maybe if he hadn't been a devotee, maybe he would have been completely blind. But he had the sight in one eye. And he was only 11. And the amazing thing he said to me, he said, oh, Mum, don't worry, it's okay. Even if I go blind, I can still chant Hare Krishna. Very special soul. So, it's not always a cut and dried situation. But no matter what our material situation is, we don't lose faith. We don't lose our trust in Krishna. Because karma is such a complex concept. And Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur said, you'll never be able to understand it. But we do know that Krishna minimizes what we really deserve, and we keep that trust. And if you've got a really, really difficult situation and you feel that, you know, your devotional life is being impeded by that, pray to Krishna. Krishna, if it is your desire, please remove this obstacle, that we're leaving it up to Krishna. Just like when Prabhupada got very, very ill and we had a 24-hour kirtan going all around the world. And the prayer that we were offering was, "Oh my Lord, if it is your desire, please make Prabhupada well." And that's what Prabhupada wanted to say, if it is your desire, Krishna. So we can have that in our prayers. If it's your desire, please remove this obstacle. If it's not your desire, then there's something I'm meant to be learning from this suffering. Is that okay? All right, thank you very much, everyone. Hare Krishna, glories to Srila Prabhupada.